Now, we've been warned, well, you've been warned too, particularly so often lately about China. Be careful. China is watching, it's spying on you. And it's not just because it's launching huge cyber attacks on our government and university databases here. Unbelievable stuff. Acts of war, really, trying to steal information. It's also spying on you. I mean, have you got a Huawei phone, perhaps, or do you use a Chinese app like TikTok? Well, your data could be grabbed and sent back to China. And now there's evidence of exactly how China does spy on Australian citizens. There's been a leak from a Chinese company that shows this company has put together files on even the families of Australian politicians, and it's done this work, it's alleged, for Chinese state security. Well, joining me is someone who's been right on top of this story since before it broke today, Sky News host Sharry Markson, who's also the investigations editor for the Australian newspaper. Sharry, you've been doing great work on this topic for quite a while now. Tell us about this Chinese surveillance.
So this is a company called Zhenhua Data, and a whistleblower has leaked significant volumes of files from within this company to cybersecurity experts. This leak happened 18 months ago, and it's taken 18 months for this group of cybersecurity experts internationally to go through the data, reconfigure it, verify it. They've given it to some intelligence agencies around the world to help verify and assess as well. And then they worked with a coalition of journalists to get that information into the public domain. And in Australia, that was the Australian Financial Review, although I was lucky enough to do the exclusive interview for Sky News with two members of this international group of cybersecurity experts. And the leak itself is very concerning. It shows that more than 2.4 million people around the world have been the target of open source surveillance by a company, this Zhenhua Data, that claims to have done work for Chinese intelligence.
Do you believe it, that it has done this for Chinese intelligence?
Of course. You've had intelligence agencies assess this data and verify it. The company's was very open. Now, after questions were put to it by members of this international group of journalists, its website's shut down. But it was fairly open about some of its the clients it's done work for: Chinese intelligence, military contractors. Its board members are linked to the PLA, to the Communist Party, and the level of the level of detail that it's tracking. And you might think open source intelligence isn't necessarily a big deal, but you can find out a lot about a person. You can paint a big picture about a person from pulling different bits of data together. And, some of the data that they're pulling together may in fact be in breach of privacy laws as well. So this is really concerning. And what's even more concerning is that in Australia, some of the people who've been targeted are not just politicians themselves, but the family members, the children, the spouses, the wives of politicians have all had an intelligence assessment done of them as well. This is part of China's infiltration or attempted infiltration of democratic nations, like Australia.
So what sort of Australians are on this list apart from politicians and some of their families?
Well, politicians' families, of course. Then there's professors and academics, particularly those in the area of research and development. There's a big focus on anyone who does work for military, defence organisations, key business people as well. So it's quite a wide range of people that, this company working on behalf, it's suspected of the Chinese Communist Party is targeting. It's really interesting as well. They also record people who have a criminal conviction. There's a big profile, for example, of Mexican drug cartels, or people who might have access to places of interest who have a criminal history as well. So it's looking at potentially levers, or this is what the cybersecurity analysts say anyway, looking at levers of ways to access information, of ways in. So it's painting quite a fascinating picture of Australia, of the UK, of the United States. I mean, 2.4 million people have had, been the target of this sort of open source surveillance. It's quite incredible.
And how do they get this information? You say open sources, so that's sources that you or I, if we really were reminded to, probably, bent our backs, we could get it too. But what sort of sources generally we're talking about?
Some of them are social media sites. There's Facebook, LinkedIn, sites like TechCrunch, etc. But then they match it with other biographical information. They match it with the news reports about a person, with their family tree. So, they're pulling a lot of different data, and then it seems like, because there's assessments that have been made of each individual, so it seems like they have employed people to make these assessments, and then there's a value next to each individual, which presumably is, how valuable they might be in terms of getting to know, in terms of a target for, infiltration. It's really quite disturbing. There are more and more leaks like this coming out because there are more people, more whistleblowers within China who are concerned about the activities of the communist government, and they are starting to take the risk of leaking these big, sets of data. We've seen it in the US before with Snowden and Assange, and more this is coming out of China. It's not the first leak, and it's not going to be the last. And this particular group been involved in other big leaks as well. I was on your show maybe a month ago talking about the leak of facial recognition software that the Chinese government was using on minority groups and dissidents. This was yet another leak. There's also been a leak from Wuhan laboratories, which showed that a significant part of that database had been deleted. So there's more of this coming out.
There's a pattern. Absolutely. There's a real pattern here. Shari Markson, thank you so much indeed for keeping us in the loop on this one.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Sort of know that Shari's getting close to the bone with this. I see her being denounced in China's official Global Times newspaper, saying Shari worked faithfully to help the US government sell lies on China. And a whole page of red-hot denunciation. Good. I'm glad she's getting to them.